2012, I came across this paper in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is Myths, Presumptions, and Facts About Obesity. And it's written by the US's foremost obesity specialist. So I thought I'd kind of run through a few myths, facts, and let's have a bit of a game. Okay, best to lose weight gradually. Is that a myth, a fact, or a presumption? Let's go for myth. Let's go for fact. And let's go for presumption. Okay, that is a myth. It's a very well-established myth, but it turns out that pretty well every study they've ever looked at, rapid and greater initial weight loss is associated with lower body weight at the end of long-term follow-up, which is surprising, isn't it? Big study out of the University of Melbourne about 18 months ago where they took 200 overweight women and randomly allocated them either to rapid weight loss. They had to lose 12.5% of their total body weight in around 12 weeks, or they had 36 weeks to do it at a rate of about half a kilo a week. And what they discovered is the dropout rate in the slow weight loss group was very high. 50% of them dropped out before they hit their target, whereas 85% of those in the rapid weight loss. And when it came to, they followed them for 2 years, and when it came to putting on weight, it was actually the slow group who put on the most weight, which is surprising. But it's also all about what you do when you shed the weight. In a sense, it kind of makes sense because you're thinking you're much more motivated if you lose it fast. But the critical thing is, how do you lose it and what do you do when you've lost it? And I'll come back to that later. So what do we think about this one? Eating breakfast. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Surely true. True, false? We're going true? False. It is false. American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, 309 participants. What they did is they got skippers and regular breakfast eaters, and they asked them to swap habits for 4 months. And lo and behold, the people who skipped it and who began eating, they lost 0.75 kilos, pretty good. Except the other way around was pretty well, exactly the same. It turns out the eat breakfast and breakfast is the most important meal of the day is mainly a slogan of the cereal companies. Okay, exercise important for weight loss. Well, we're going true? False? Well, you should be up with me. There's another false one. And the problem is that if you're a 65-kilo woman, you're going to have to walk 40 minutes to burn off a banana, 60 minutes for a fruit juice, 80 minutes for a glass of wine, 2 hours for a bar of chocolate, and a muffin 3 hours. So put that muffin down. And if you want to lose if you want to lose half a kilo of fat, you're going to have to run 44 miles. So you can do it, or you can just put the muffin down. And that is not actually the worst of it, but the problem is as well, because what people do is what's called compensatory eating, and compensatory relaxing. Basically, you sit on your ass afterwards. So, we all know that in order to be healthy, you need to eat a healthy diet. But what is a healthy diet? Okay, so sugar is the obvious villain. This is the UK, sugar consumption since 1700. Anyone got any idea what happened in 1850? I would be very impressed if you knew. This is when Gladstone removed the tax on sugar. And it kind of makes the case for a tax on sugar, doesn't it? And the other two dips basically are the First and the Second World War. Now, this is correlated against diabetes, but it could have been against obesity. You get exactly the same pattern. And what you see there is rates of type 2 diabetes up from about 1% in the UK when I was born, and now running at 8 to 9%. Gone up nearly tenfold. Same is true in Australia, worse in Vietnam, worse in China, worse in almost any country you can imagine. Right. Now, the average Australian kid consumes their own weight in sugar every year, over 30 kilos. And these are the villains. So I shouldn't have gone through that one so fast. Dwell on this one. This is obviously Coca-Cola, fizzy drinks, and things like that. They are the number one villain. And then we have cornflakes, number 2 villain. And anyone know this guy? This Dr. Kellogg. Dr. Kellogg. 1900s, and Dr. Kellogg basically invents cornflakes for this reason. There is a disease that is sweeping America, affecting young boys and girls. It leads to cancer of the womb, urinary disease, impotence, epilepsy, insanity, and death. The victim literally dies by his own hand. Do you know what he's talking about? Masturbation. Yeah, that was it. The reason Dr. Kellogg invents cornflakes is because he's worried about masturbation. And he thinks quite rightly that cornflakes are going to basically undermine the health of the youth. And he was, this time when there's a lot of conversation about, child abuse, Dr. Kellogg was very, very fond of advocating circumcision for boys and girls to stop them doing it. He actually broke with his brother, because his brother basically said, look, this stuff tastes like absolute, rubbish. It tastes like cardboard. It tastes worse than cardboard. We got to pump it full of sugar. And Dr. Kellogg, bless him, said no. So his brother went off and founded the Kellogg's empire. And as you're well aware, a lot of cereals now have 30, 40, 50% sugar. And they have continued the very fine tradition of Dr. Kellogg. Dr. Kellogg was also fond of yogurt. Now, for breakfast. Now, I'm a fan of yogurt, particularly full-fat yogurt for breakfast, but not the way Dr. Kellogg administered it, rectally. He believed in yogurt enemas, a couple of pints of yogurt first thing in the morning. Get you going. He was kind of ahead of his time in the sense that he recognized the microbiome, gut bacteria was a good thing, but not by that delivery system. Here's another villain for you, if you like, Dr. Ansel Keys. You familiar with him? Dr. Ansel Keys is a physiologist, beginning in the 1950s and culminating really in the 1980s. He convinced the American government and then the world that basically fat was the villain. Fat is what makes us fat. Fat is what clogs up your arteries and gives you heart disease. Unfortunately, what then happened, obviously, is that people kind of believed that the manufacturers basically went crazy for low-fat products and they stuffed them full of sugar instead. So if you took a Starbucks muffin, low-fat version, it actually has 10% more calories than the normal version. But because it says low-fat, people thought it wouldn't make them fat. So what happened in 1980, which is when I and Claire went to medical school, is the world was swamped by the low-fat message. And unfortunately, it not only kind of undermined the health, if you like, of the US, but much of the rest of the world. So Coca-Cola are obviously spreading their message as we go now. They've kind of done the developed world. They're now moving on, I think, to Africa and things like that. The sugar industry is very much like the tobacco industry. They know they've lost the fight, but they're going to go on fighting it. So what happened is fat was bad for you. Fat was going to kill you. But was that really true? Well, there have been a number of really big studies. This one here, for example, the Women's Health Initiative Dieting Modification Trial, part of a bigger trial which cost $600 million, over $500 million US. One of the biggest trials ever done and really important. And it started in 1992. 49,000 women who were randomly allocated to low fat or to continue as normal. And they were followed for 8 years. So this was a big trial, randomized, all gold standard things, very good trial. In the group who were going low fat, their fat consumption fell from 39 to 29%, went down by a quarter. This is really big numbers, very, very impressive. And at the end of 8 years, the weight difference was 0.4 of a kilo between the two groups. 8 years of being on a low fat diet, that's the result. And the important measures were things like heart disease, stroke, breast cancer, colorectal cancer, made no difference at all, none. And they've done other big studies. No low-fat diet I'm aware of that has been part of a randomized controlled trial has ever made a significant difference to any of the things they promised they would. Let me tell you about this one. Anyone heard of the PREDIMED study? This is in many ways an even more important study done in Spain. Just over 7,000 Spaniards randomly allocated to a low-fat or a Mediterranean diet. And both groups were encouraged to eat more fruit and veg and cut down on sugary snacks, kind of standard advice. And the low-fat group were encouraged to eat plenty of bread, pasta, potatoes, keep oil to a minimum, eat low-fat dairy and lean fish. You know, the standard, that sounds pretty standard, doesn't it? The Mediterranean diet basically encouraged to eat plenty of eggs, nuts, oily fish, add lots of olive oil. They were not calorie controlled in any way. Cook with it, glug with it, stick it on your salad, do whatever you want with it. They were also encouraged to eat dark chocolate in the evening, not huge amounts, but bits of it, and have a glass of wine with their evening meal. So that's kind of what the Mediterranean diet looks like. It looks nice, doesn't it? Thinking I could handle that. And so what were the results of PREDIMED? Well, what they found is you were 30% less likely to die from a heart or a stroke if you were on the the Mediterranean than on the low-fat diet, okay? So your risk of becoming diabetic was 50% less if you were on the Mediterranean diet. If you were on the Mediterranean diet and you were supplementing with extra virgin oil, you were nearly 70% less likely to develop breast cancer. Biggest result I've ever seen, anywhere. A low-fat diet, zero effect on breast cancer. And what you can see here is that there's something about the olive oil, and they think it's something called oleic acid. They're not quite sure. They're doing follow-up studies. This was a paper published about 2 months ago. Because what's happening is the trial, which began in '92, is still running. They're just still getting new information out of it. And they also did lots of brain tests on the memory tests. And they found if you were on the Mediterranean diet, you were much less likely to develop dementia, and also you're much less likely to have memory problems. All this stuff, and also how to Mediterraneanize your diet, is in my new book. I might as well plug it here. Which is the blood sugar diet, because I think Mediterranean diet is absolutely the heart of everything I'm talking about now. Everybody agrees, dietitians agree, pretty well everyone agrees. They may not wholly agree about what the Mediterranean diet is, and I'll go on to that, but you can quite simply make your diet far more Mediterranean, if you like. But go and Google Predimed, and what is fantastic is they give you exactly what happened. And it has lots of just other things, like they encourage them to, every meal should be eaten in a chair, behind a table. That never eat a meal standing up. Never eat a meal you can hold in one hand, there are certain rules. Okay, so the NHS, God bless them, they basically have a section you go to and it says, what is a Mediterranean diet? And they describe this. This apparently is a Mediterranean diet. If you look at it and read it carefully, it is actually indistinguishable from a low-fat diet. In fact, it is a low-fat diet. There is nothing in there about any of the constituents of the Predimed study. They say the Predimed study is brilliant. They say they describe the details in great detail, and then they produce this thing which is called the Eat Well plate, which we talk of as the Eat Very Badly plate. And there is a sort of dissonance, there is a complete misconnect between what the evidence shows and what government bodies show. And if you go and look at the Australian version of this, it's exactly the same. Nothing has changed. It's like 20 years of research have come and gone. The Predimed study has come and gone. The Women's Health Initiative. I could cite you another dozen studies. And it's like nothing has changed. And I find that really, really odd. And if you go to the diabetes website, you get the same sort of thing, low-fat diet. And yet, when you talk to them, everybody goes, Mediterranean diet, yeah, it's the way to go. We all recognize that, blah, 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 blah. But that's not what they say. And I find that odd. Anyway, I got interested in diabetes and type 2 diabetes because in 2012 I discovered I was a type 2 diabetic. And I'd been on low-fat diets, all sorts of things, none of them ever worked. My dad died of type 2 diabetes-related illnesses, so went to see my GP, she said go on low-fat diet, I said, and start medication. I said, no, thank you. And I got hold of a whole bunch of our researchers, and they went off and they found out about intermittent fasting. Anyone see this one? Eat fast, live longer? So this was kind of inspired as well. That's my guts. Well, that's a scan. That white stuff is fat, because I was what's called a toffee, thin on the outside, fat inside. And it's really the fat that's kind of lining my liver and my pancreas that's causing the problems. And here's Dr. Varady, who's one of my experts I went to see. She does research into what's called alternate day fasting, where basically you cut your calories every other day by about a quarter. So that's around 500 or 600 calories every other day. I tried it and I found it quite tricky, so I went for 2 days a week, Mondays and Thursdays, and this is my thing. 5-2 fast diet, 600 calories twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays. At least in part because the Prophet Muhammad recommended Mondays and Thursdays, and I thought I'll get the Muslims to buy my book, if nothing else. I have to say, all the great religions have advocated fasting. So that was me beforehand. I was 85 kilos, not hugely overweight, body fat 28%, and my blood glucose 7.3, which puts me in the diabetic range. And IGF-1 is a measure of cancer risk, right at the top. And that's me after about 8 to 10 weeks. I've lost 9 kilos, body fat down 21%, waist down 32 inches, and best of all, fasting glucose down to 5.4, which is normal, which is where I've stayed, and my cancer risk has approximately halved. So that was 4 years ago. I'm still the same weight, and my blood glucose same. So there we go. Grateful patient.